gentlemen, the President of the United States.
For the final time during my presidency, this House is graced with the company of the heroes who have scaled heights known only to a very few men in this land.
The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress March 3, 1863, has awarded in the name of the Congress the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Drew D. Dix, United States Army.
Drew Dix is a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. As an Army Special Forces Sergeant, during his first Vietnam tour, detailed to the CIA, Dix was awarded the Medal of Honor for heroic acts including saving lives, retaking important territory, and capturing enemy soldiers. He became the first enlisted man in the U.S. Army Special Forces to receive the Medal of Honor. Dix's military career continued for 20 years, including work in Greenland on a classified contract from 1985 to 1995 with a mission to establish ice stations on the Arctic Ocean to track Soviet submarines. Following the attacks of September 11th, he was asked by the governor of Alaska to advise him on the strategies that should be used to protect the oil infrastructure in Alaska. He served as Alaska's first Director of Homeland Security and retired from the state of Alaska as a Deputy Commissioner within the Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. In a 2004 film documentary, Dix showed the humility and sense of duty we see so often in our heroes.
Anytime you receive notoriety or recognition in anything you do, your life is just starting. You should use that as a point to build upon, not just sit back on your haunches and kind of let life float by. Let's face it, if I'd done that when I was 24 years old, I wouldn't have done much since then.
His personal mission was clear: to create a national initiative to recognize and preserve the values our great country was founded on.
The founding fathers and those that fought in the Revolutionary War or were involved in the Revolutionary War, they were patriots, but not all of them carried a gun. I mean, they believed in their country. I felt that I needed to continue to serve. I'm retired. I retired from the military. I retired from another occupation. But you don't really retire. I mean, you just think of other things to do.
In 2010, Drew Dix became a founder of the Center for American Values, located in his hometown of Pueblo, Colorado. Dix's deep commitment to America and his passion for the core values of honor, integrity, and patriotism became the center's mission.
All of our vision is focused on family, community, and country. It's a foundation. If you don't have a strong family and a strong community values, you're not going to have a strong country. We all have an opportunity to serve, and some of us have raised our hand to serve this nation of ours, and others can reach their hand out.
Drew Dix will continue in his quest to honor people from all walks of life who through courage and dedication have made extraordinary accomplishments. Drew Dix is a selfless hero who wants America's youth to recognize and truly understand the sacrifices made by others by providing unique educational opportunities through the Center for American Values.
Doing great work over there. Want to thank my dear friend Drew Dix. Thank you, Drew, for all you do and for all you have done for our country. Thank you very much. God bless you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me recognize and welcome Medal of Honor recipient Drew Dix.
Thank you very much. It's really good to see a lot of our friends from Pueblo and other places. It's always good to see them here in the center. You know, I like to emphasize the fact that we always raise our hand to do things and not have their hands out. And this group right here is an example of those that are raising their hands to do things. And I thank you for the opportunity to stand alongside of you to do all the great things for this country. I decided that it was important to talk a little bit about things that are in the news, and everybody heard a little bit about that Greenland might be for sale or something like that, but I'm not going to talk too much about the diplomacy of that or the politics of that at all. That's not really important. But what is very important is the fact that the current administration recognizes the importance, strategic importance of Greenland. And we've all heard about the things that have kept this country safe in North America is these two bodies of water on each side of us. And when you realize that where Greenland, if you look on the map, where Greenland is, it's on the top of that body of water in Atlantic. And especially now that it is, the climate is changing. It is, there's no argument with that. We won't get into why, but it is getting warmer. And when the ice gets warmer and the accesses to Greenland get warm, clear, then they're available to anyone that might want to make an incursion in the United States. So my history has been over the years in special operations and different environments. And I happened to be in Alaska, and in the early 1980s, 84 to be exact, I had just come back from a little soiree through the Middle East. I was over in the Emirates, and just came back, and someone called me and said something about this ice project, because I was in Alaska, right, and I could jump out of airplanes, and they needed some help in figuring out how to establish a presence on the ice. And I got to thinking about, why do we need to do that? Well, here's why we need to do that. In the Cold War, mainly between Russia and the United States, was a constant buildup of offensive nuclear weapons. Not much on defense of them. I think President Reagan tried a Star Wars thing, which was very visionary, but anyway, building up, 5,000 here, 6,000 here, just kept building up. Well, okay, we could do that forever, but the problem is the vulnerabilities of those nuclear weapons, especially when the United States and the Soviet Union took them under the water in submarines, and the submarine forces were being built up pretty rapidly, and then the U.S. Navy had a pretty substantial submarine force. But when you think about we all knew intercontinental ballistic missiles, maybe they take off from a landmass and you could track them, and you have maybe 45 minutes, an hour, or whatever to track it. But from the ice or the ocean, they can get pretty close to our landmass. And so we were the Navy, and I'm not privy to this because I'm not in the Navy, but I know later that the Navy was working real hard at keeping track of the enemy submarines. And we were following them under the water and trying to intercept them and, in fact, figure out where they were. And then between the Navy and the Air Force, they learned how to drop buoys in there. I think you just hold the screen right now and not move it around. But to keep track of where these submarines are. And they were dropping buoys and all that, and it worked pretty good. But then the technology was developed by us and the Russians to go under the ice, and they could launch a missile through the ice. And I've heard these figures. I think it's probably pretty accurate that a missile launched from a submarine under the ice near the northern part of Canada would take about 20 minutes to get to New York or someplace like that. Not enough time to do anything. So the Navy started ramping up their operations on the ice to figure out how they could determine where these submarines were. hiding lurking around under the ice. And so in 1984, they had previously tried to do this by landing on the ice, and they had some disasters. A plane went through the ice and all of that, and they said, oh, we can't be doing that. And so they said, and we had a high, this was very sensitive, but it was not wartime footing where military people that are committed to warfare have less restrictions because it was a safety restriction. So they got contractor to be able to go in there because they didn't care much about the contractors, I guess, and to go into the ice, onto the ice. And so my buddy John Bitters, who was a former New Zealand SAS guy, had a lot of experience on the ice. We would, the idea was to go into the ice, parachute in, because you couldn't just land and without knowing what you're landing on. And so the idea was that we would, there's a picture of Jumper right there, he's a character. But, so what we did is learned how to, we went to station Thule, Greenland. And everybody knows, heard a little bit about Greenland, especially the military guys, that is always said, if you screw up, you're going to go to Thule, because it was really not a real good place to be assigned. But anyway, we go to Thule, and the Tri-Turbo was an aircraft specially designed, if you want to put that up there for me. That one right there, it's an old airplane, about 1939, but that one might be a little bit newer, maybe 40 or something. But they designed it to put 3 turbine engines on it, one on each wing and one on the nose. And that airplane could perform very well, but it couldn't land on the ice unless it was surveyed. So we would parachute out of that airplane after we spent maybe as many as 6, 7, 8, 10 days looking for the absolute right ice, because we had to make sure that where we were going to establish our ice station was secure enough and would survive where we would put our devices. The scientists would put in their devices for tracking submarines. And so we had to have the exact right ice so we wouldn't it wouldn't break up. And of course, you know, we had an incentive of finding a really good ice, because that's how they're going to get us out of there. From Thule, Greenland, I would say where we would go would be 700, 800 miles near the pole. And we picked the pole because ice moving all the time. Just, could you stop some of these slides until I ask for them? But it's moving all the time, about 0.2 of a knot an hour in a clockwise rotation called a gyre, and it's tied up at the pole. So we really like that, to be able to be up there on the pole. And so we'd go there, and we did that for a couple years, and we spent a lot of time picking the absolute right ice. Well, this picture's on there, and I'll tell you that wasn't the right ice, because if you see right here, that first little piece of ice was the first tent we put in there, the 2 of us. And we had put it in there, and I stretched a dipole antenna up, which is a communication antenna. We didn't have GPSs in those days, right? And so we decided that this was the perfect spot. Now, 1 time out of 10, it wasn't perfect. So we had this Navy guy, the lieutenant commander, come up to me, and his eyes were this big all the time anyway, because he'd heard about freezing to death on the ice. And he came up and says, there's a little crack right here. Well, that was nothing, but it was real dynamic, a lot of noise popping and whatever. And I looked up when he got my attention. I said, I'm not worried about that, but I am that. And it was a big black piece of real estate. When the ice is gone, all you see is ocean. And I had these 5 guys, 4 other guys, that had just gotten there. A couple of them never been on the ice. So I immediately was concerned about them, and we had a survival sled. And we had moved from one ice floe to another, and we were down to about 100 feet across. And I wasn't sure if we had enough survival stuff, but for 5. But I saw 2 points of the ice moving this way. And I said, if we luck out, because it's about 5 or 6 feet, 10 feet across, right about here is going to be 2 or 3 feet across, and we could hop over if it just hit it at the right point. And it did. You got to have a lot of luck. Well, and we hopped over, got over, and just before we did, because the dipole antenna was stretching and ready to pop, I got a position report and said we had a breakup. And Monty Stevenson, a real well-known ice pilot from Canada, they got the message, and it was about I don't know, close to 5.5-hour flight to where we were from Station Nord, which is the very top of Greenland. And so no GPSs, but he knew about where we were supposed to be, and he flew there, and he was ready to turn back, and we only had, I don't know, because he knew it'd be 14 more hours if he turned around and come back. And he was able to, I could hear the airplane. I said, Monty, I hear you. He said, where? I said, you're about 2 o'clock. Does anybody know what that means? I hear people, young guys don't even know what the clock is anymore. But 2 o'clock is from the direction of his travel be, maybe 20 degrees to the right or something like that. But anyway, he picked us up and he landed, and I'm telling you this because that's what people are going to ask about when they see that picture. And he landed, and the ice was breaking in front of him. And once he hopped over the ice, and I said, I think we're going to have another. He was just by himself, another guy on the survival sled. And anyway, he landed, he stopped, and we ran over there, and the ice was breaking, and the guys were carrying just their little personal gear, and we were throwing it off to get on, and he was on skis, and he's taking off, and the ice broke again right in front of us, and he pulled up, and he hopped over it and made it back. So there's a lot of people that are behind projects like this that, I always think about them putting their life on the line to make something successful. So my hat's off to Monty. But anyway, we made it back, and the idea was the ice will stop moving. After a storm, it can really move 20, 30 miles in a couple days. And we found this flow again, and you see the solid up, the ice to the top. That was the flow we ended up using, and we took an airdrop of fuel from C-141s that flew out of Charleston, and we were able to put in our ice stations. So by this time, we knew the Russians knew where we were. A lot of radio traffic, a lot of this, a lot of that. Looked pretty hairy situation. And so what we did is and our projects were very successful. One, it was under the cover of science. It was the Arctic Research Environmental Assessment Area was the name of the project. And so we didn't take a lot of care in concealing that, but we'd go from that point, maybe 100 miles or so, by some means to get there, and put in our devices. And we learned up there that when the Navy did it with the Canadians and they landed on refrozen leads, what that is the ice break apart, it's open water, and then it gradually freezes, and it can be almost just mushy ice, and then it gets to 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch thick, and a twin otter needs about 6 inches. If you've got a little nerve, you can do it. 9 they like better. But anyway, we could learn to land on that ice, and if the wind blows in, because the ice flow is above the water, it grows this way, right? So you get the snow to blow in and fill in, and then it's a little hard on the nose gear, but they use that as a ramp and get up on the solid ice. So sometimes when it just snows, you can't tell how thick that ice is. So you try. Now, we didn't do that on the leads with the tri-turbo because it was just too heavy, but the twin otter we could do with. So anyway, what the project was is basically keeping track of the Soviet submarines. Now, in doing that, you also had to keep track of ours and the British and the whatever, so you know the different signature that they give off. But it was very successful, and somebody, some genius in the Navy, would keep track of the different signatures of these submarines so they know who they were following. And everybody has heard of Hunt for Red October. I think that came out in '89, Tom Clancy's book, and it was he's a visionary on how things could be. Well, guess what? In 1991, there was a coup when the Soviet Union threw in the towel, and a lot of the military leaders, generals mainly, didn't want to cash into the United States or give up. So there was a coup attempt. And that was in '91, and we thought our project was going to be over by '91 or '92 after that, because, you know, we got peace with the Soviet Union, and it's over, right? Well, no, it's not. But anyway, supposedly, when the coup took over, just like in Hunt for Red October, they were worried about where the two significant, if I remember right, there were two main big submarines that we were worried about. And the chief scientist from our project was called in to wherever they make these decisions. I'm assuming it was in the command center. And he said, well, I know where they were. And he personally told me that. He came all the way to Alaska to brief me. We were walked in the woods, and he was telling me that our project saved the deal. So for 3 or 4 more years, we established Ice Station Crystal and a couple others to continue doing that. So when I want to just show that picture where it shows the resupply. And this is how you got that picture? There it is. So that's C-141s that coming all the way in from South Carolina nonstop would drop our fuel. That's all fuel. And you have to have fuel. There's no firewood for all of you MacGyvers out there that want to survive. You aren't going to survive unless you have fuel. So that is what that is, and that kept us going. It also was fuel for the aircraft that would fly with heavy cargo and refuel there to go back. So the payload was not eaten up with fuel to come to our location. And the other, I want to show that one, the Pioneer tent. Show the one where the small tent is covered up with ice. Anyway, when Jumper and I would go in, we didn't take a tent because cargo space was premium. We took the small command tent and used it as a small tent to stay in until we made a runway and cleared it out. Well, almost every day, every time you go in, there's storms brew. They come up. It's just like clockwork. So as soon as you go in, you get a window, 3-day blow. That was totally covered up, and we had to dig our way out. But that is what we called the Pioneer tent. And so Jumper and I got to know each other pretty good after 3 days. We'd listen to Radio Free Estonia, which they claim was the original Grand Ole Opry. And so one time they were looking for Jumper and Drew. They knew where we all doing what we were doing. So then I'm going to open up for some questions, because I think that's more important than me just talking about what I think you want to hear. But show the one about the diver. So one of the projects was we put a hole in the ice, and the ice that we looked for had to be multi-year ice. That means it wasn't just a refrozen lead. It had to be a big chunk that they're almost all round, because they cruise around the Arctic and they got the edges knocked off, and they're about 7 feet thick. So that ice is 7 to 8 feet thick right there, And I can't tell you exactly what the diver was doing, but but it was very important to maintain some of our things that we were doing out there. And so that's pretty hardy soul there. And needless to say, the tether to the diver was very important, so he could find that hole, because the ice is always moving, and it may not be able to come up at the right spot. The seals seem to find it. I'm not talking about the Navy SEALs. I'm talking about the ones that bark. Show that one about the camp with the polar bears, and I can explain that. So someone asked me what the danger was on the ice. Well, one of them was a breakup, and one was these guys right here. They're out there for doing one thing. They're looking for food. And everything, of course, that's a male, because males don't hibernate. The females do. And so this guy's lonely. And he had a lot on his mind, and he was looking for dinner. And so we didn't look to kill any of them. We had an agreement with the Greenlanders to not kill them unless it was in defense. So we tried many ways to get rid of them and chased them off. And we found that this was taken on the shore-fast ice shelf. And that's our base camp that resupplied us way out on the ice. And the shelf ice is shore-fast, so it doesn't move. It's just solid. It's a good place to put our supplies and everything. And so the food that was kept there was just on white tables. You've seen like these white tables, and we didn't worry about refrigeration, so they had the food stacked up there, and a lot of good. We ate pretty good. Somebody's going to ask me how much we had to eat. It was a lot. We had to eat a lot. But we had, salmon and beef and lobsters and everything. And you'd think that bear would go after that? No. That bear came back 3 times. The last 2 times it went for strawberry ice cream and frozen French fries. And a whole line of stuff. So we know they have preferences too. But anyway, they were able to chase it off. That was the one year we had a helicopter up there to help us, but that was too risky. They just didn't work good in that cold, so we only did it 1 year. But the helicopter was able to chase that bear off. So that was that. If you put the one up that we had first with the 2 of us and the sail of the submarine, so that's a submarine. Now that's on pretty thick ice. That's in a refrozen lead. I'd say it's about 3 foot thick. And what we did is we knew every submarine has a distance. Every submarine has a distance from the front of the sail to the emergency escape hatch. So we could go out there, and we really didn't pace it off. We actually had a rope that said that we could extend it, and we'd take a chainsaw and cut out the 2 or 3 feet of ice that they came through, so we could get into the submarine or they could come out. You can crawl up and climb down the ladder, those steps, but it's pretty dangerous because it's very icy, which leads me into the final thing I want to mention before we go for questions is show us the one where I'm standing there. Well, that's the ice, a good picture of the ice, right? That's what all it is. There's nothing out there. But in 91, after 91, I got a call. Now here's how this project was run by a 3-star admiral who was he actually replaced Rickover. Everybody heard of Rickover? But Admiral DeMars ran the submarine nuclear deal. I don't know exactly the title. But Admiral DeMars was in charge. He's the main guy. But as an ice station leader, they gave me complete authority to say who came to the ice under the name of safety. So that gave me the authority over any decision, period. That was my contract, because it's so dangerous that we couldn't have idiots out there that thought they knew what to do, and I got a few idiot stories, but I'd rather not. So in '92, I got a call from Admiral DeMars, radio message, said, would you consider taking some senators and some congressmen and the chief of the budget accounting office on the ice? And I said, we're done. We're over. We're backhauling. It's May. Ice is getting rotten. And he said, well, I respectfully request you to consider that, because this might be the future of the contract the next 2 or 3 years, not so much for the benefit of the contractors, but because we all knew that the mission and the importance of the ice is not going away just because the Soviet Union throws in the towel, right? We know that. It's very important to this day. So I said, okay, but on one condition. They split up their team with 2 Twin Otters. If one crashes, we got another one to get everybody out. The Twin Otters have to stay on the ice overnight, which I had to sell that to Ken Boric Air, who owned those Twin Otters, because their rule was not to spend the night. Now, incidentally, it does not get night out there. When we parachuted in and started looking was the 21st of March, that's when the sun comes up. It stays up, and the sun goes this way, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, but never this way. Doesn't go this way. So anyway, the sun's up. They came, they agreed, because they wanted probably contract, the money for them, they wanted to contract. So they flew them out there. And could you show that one where on the blue, the guys in the blue parkas, and I'm standing there in the middle there. So I don't know if you recognize, see the name tag. One's G-O-R-E, the expert of the ice. So right about that time, he got off there and he's looking for the mayor of Crystal. That's what they call me. And I guess I didn't look like the mayor. He walked right by me. But anyway, he says he didn't waste any time. And he was saying, what are you doing up here? I said, well, I'm sure you've been briefed. I was told that. I don't want to waste your time. Tell you something you already know. No. He was gathering information about being ice, the Arctic, right? Is it getting warm out here? You know, that kind of stuff. No, it's colder than hell, but it's breaking up. Oh, it's getting too warm. I said, no, it does that every year. That kind of stuff. But anyway, so the idea was that they're going to come up. We're going to bring a submarine up. They already planned this. They didn't just say, Drew, order a submarine. No, it was there. And so about 1.5 miles away off of our ice floe, there was a refrozen lead I knew about. It was about 2 feet thick. And I put bamboo, I had bamboo poles. We use them a lot. They stick right into frozen snow, not ice. And we put black flags on them so we could see. And everybody says, well, that's taking a lot of time. I said, no, we got to do this. We got some guys here that we can't lose them up here. So we got them, and sure enough, the submarine came up, popped them through the ice. We cheated a little bit. I could make an X on the ice, cut the snow off, and they could see it through their periscope and pop right up. And they didn't have time for me to do the access, cut out for the access. So these guys, a couple of them pretty fat, pardon me, but with big boots on, that much between the rebar steps and the side of the stale, and it's over 20 feet. And they're climbing up, and I'm thinking we're going to lose somebody. I had a few I thought we'd be okay if we lost them, but they all got in there, and they left. And then they're going to go sail to the North Pole, which isn't not too far away, surface on their own in open water, and come back, say they were on the North Pole. And so they did that, and then all of a sudden I get this garbled message like on an underwater telephone that's real ice station, Crystal, this is Pargo, over. And now here's a captain of a ship, skipper, that is talking very slow, and he's got these guys wanting off that ship. hell of a storm kicked up. Could not get to them. There was no way. So finally, the next message was out in the clear. Oh, they surfaced. And so I got me and another guy, and we went, we took a snow machine, got down there, and they're going to nose that very expensive submarine on up to the ice, which the skipper knew he shouldn't do that because the front of that is very delicate. That's where the stuff is. And I said, and then it's almost about from where it levels off to the nose and the ice would be over 10 feet. So they had a Navy diver on this boat, and these guys are going to jump over. And there's no way. So I told them we can't do it. I jumped over, got on there, went down below, and there's a little room that's about half the size of this one back here, and they're all in there just, and I remember that one said, I've got to attend a committee on drugs and something in Indochina on Wednesday. And I need to get back. I said, Senator, this is Monday. You aren't making it. You aren't getting back. And nothing I can do about it. Not getting back. And I'll never forget this congressman, McNulty or something from New York, older guy, stopped everybody. He said, I want to take this time to apologize to the mayor. We shouldn't be here. And if all you guys haven't figured out, it's a dangerous place, and he's got enough on his mind. So anyway, that's the deal. And the skipper on that boat saw his whole career go away, you know, because he couldn't make him get off the boat and find a place to go. So I went on back, and lo and behold, 6 hours later, weather cleared, bluebird, nice, colder than hell, but still nice. And I raced over there, got them. The Twin Otters have been up all night, and they agreed to fly anyway, even though they didn't sleep. They said they slept. That's what they could say, because they wanted off of there, because the wind was picking up, and those things aren't. We had to cargo straps over the wings, drill holes, and ice them in to keep the wings down. So when we unhooked them, we got our cargo out of there. But anyway, the project lasted for 2 more years. But here's the deal that I'm afraid of. And anything we do, politics will get involved, and politics should not get involved in anything as important as this. It should leave it up to the experts that know. And we could have lost somebody there, but we didn't. And so anyway, our project went for 2 more years. So the last thing I want to mention was, okay, the Cold War was over, and started really winding down about 92, 93. We're in pretty good shape. And but we were out there and making another ice station, and I looked out and I saw something way off in the distance, and I said, Jumper, and he was out there knocking ice hummocks off so we could get a plane to land. And in his Kiwi accent, he says, you haven't ever seen a blankety blank mirage before? And I said, Jumper, look, this is no mirage. And what it was 2 heavy bombers that were patrolling up there, and they flew over us. Pretty low, a couple hundred feet. Pretty low for, it's equivalent to our B-52s. And this is the funny part of the story. So they made a 20-minute turn to come around, and they dropped a little bit lower, and they're lower. And I said, man, they're really, they made us, so what can we do? And then they made another 20 minutes. So Jumper and I, with our flat-tip shovels, jumped out on the thin ice and knocked off the hoarfrost, they call it, which left the very black letters, and I won't tell you what they said, but it was a message to Ivan. And so the planes came by, and we got a thumbs up from the pilots. And military people all think alike. But I'm gonna, earlier today, we did the beginning of a podcast, and we're going to tie this series of these things into podcasts, like either once a week or something, and we're going to film it upstairs in Brad's studio. Got a remarkable studio. So we did that. So we led that podcast into this, and the idea is the things that keep you up all night. And the other idea is that we hear Greenland was for sale. So people are thinking about that. So the podcast is going to be on that subject, basically what I said today to you. But what I want to do is we're going to thread that in, pieces of it, with Brad and his crew's magic, the questions and answers that we generate from this. So you will be on there, and if you're on witness protection or something and don't want your name on there or your picture, then say so and it won't be on there. But feel free to ask the question. We know how to blank everybody out. But so there's a lot of things that I could go into, but you couldn't do it in an hour. The bottom line is, guys, never hesitate to do this kind of work. And because they do it for the right reason. One, maybe for the adventure of it, but two, they know they're doing some good. So keep in mind there's people today doing this stuff. I am sure, I hope, because this was 30 and 40 years ago, that the technology is better, that we don't have to have somebody parachuting on the ice, drilling some holes in there, dropping stuff down, and keeping track of those submarines, that we know how to do it better. I'm sure of that. But there's always other things that people will be risking themselves to accomplish the mission. This part of the world is probably, in my opinion, I've been to lots of places in the world, the most inhospitable place there is, because of the cold, because there's no means of survival unless you bring it in, and there's about 9,000 to 12,000 feet of water under you. Now, it doesn't matter if it's 6 feet of water, but the idea of 9, 10, 12,000 feet of water is pretty intimidating for some people. And so that's why it's very, very important. We never had to evacuate other than that one breakup, and it turned out okay. But our E&E plan was to walk to Spitsbergen, if we had to, Svalbard, 450 some miles from the pole. That's the only way. But Spitsbergen is a Norwegian and Russian island, kind of. And the tricky part of that is what side of the island or where we came up on when we did it, because they share that island under a conservation kind of agreement. But that's the kind of things that we had to take in consideration. And I'm thinking of some others, but maybe they'll come out in the questions. But in I forget what it was, 86 maybe, they recognized, the United States recognized the explorers, some of the well-known explorers, back in the, late in the 1800s. You heard of Hansen and Greeley and all those, and they made a postage stamp for them, right? And I was privileged to be presented the first one in honor of them. So I brought that, and maybe there's a slide there, but I think the fact that always it's important to know that there's folks doing stuff, and they've been doing it for a long time. And those hardy souls that were out there in the late 1800s in wooden boats that froze their boats in so they could take advantage of the gyration of the pole of the water. And of course, they some of them didn't make it, and some did. And anyway, they're very famous in Greenland. And so, any questions? I just Tanya has the microphone, and feel free to answer ask anything, because there's so much more that I can tell, and it'll trigger something that's important.
We have one right here, Drew.
Why is Iceland called Greenland and wait? Why is Greenland called Greenland when it isn't exactly green?
Well, that's a good question. I've heard that before. Greenland is not very green, right? The very bottom part of Greenland is pretty nice, I guess. They got farms and all that, but there's not a lot of people. Now, Iceland is a very, it's pretty nice little place. I've never been there, but I'm hearing it's very nice. But that brings up a very, does anybody realize how really big Greenland is? It's really big. Well, let me tell you. So those of you from Pueblo West, what are there, about 40,000 people living out there? Well, Greenland's got 55,000 in the whole country. And if you left Thule or Station Nord, and let's say there were 40,000 people, but there's only 5, I know who they were, they're probably still 5, and go all the way to Tampa, Florida, and see no people. That's the vastness of it. There's Thule's got a military base there, then there's Sandestrom on the west side as well. Not a lot of people. But Iceland is called Iceland, I guess, because they thought it was cool, and Greenland, they probably wanted to think that that it's a nice, happy place to be, but it's not very green. Which brings up the other point is when we went from Thule, we stationed ourselves out of Station Nord, very top of Greenland. And we did that because it's about 300 miles closer to the pole. So and it's very, very top. And so we started going up there. Now, to my knowledge, the only presence of Danish, except maybe some local folks down by Nuuk in the bottom, is 5 Danish soldiers that live on the top of Greenland. Now, they rotate every 2 years, and the Danish had an obligation to establish their sovereignty is to have a dog team go from Nord in the middle, the top there. I'm going to say this is probably Nord, right there. And the dog team would go a few hundred miles this way, and another one go a few hundred miles this way and back. And they did that every year. It's called the Cirrus Patrol. And that's what the Danes are doing. That's their obligation. I'm glad to see that Denmark has decided to put a couple of $2 billion into establishing the presence there. And I think that's what our administration really wants, is them to recognize that that plugs the gap between the Atlantic and our territory, our country. Another question.
Oh, tariffs. It is speculated that the tariff issue with Canada and the United States involves that Canada only has 2 icebreakers. Russia has 74. Canada doesn't properly police this area. Then the other issue is Canada has rare minerals, and so does Greenland, apparently equivalent to China. Do you think that's the issue behind the tariffs?
No, not icebreakers per se. No, who knows what the real, I think there's a plan and all that. I guarantee you that somebody's thinking about it. I don't. I think that bringing pressure on, so Russia has a lot of icebreakers, right? I mean, they can just go right across there, churn up the ice and go through it. We have 3. One's in mothballs, and the other one is floating around and they're robbing parts off of it. And then that's the Polar Sea and the Polar Star. And then the heli is a small one. They're not big enough to do anything. The Russians, Chinese have considerable icebreakers, even Japan. They clear out their harbors and stuff. They can churn right on through there. What the Russians do now, for science, maybe science like we did, is they take an icebreaker, churn to where they want to go, let it freeze in, and live off the icebreaker. Get off during the day, do their thing, get back on the icebreaker, and live pretty comfortably, drink their vodka, whatever they do. But it's a better environment. But they can do that. We can't.
Hi, Drew. First, thanks for talking to us all. We appreciate your presence and your stories. When you were on the ice, were the Russians involved in similar tasks that you were doing? Were they playing the same?
The Russians were doing similar things. They do it differently, and they weren't as good. What they did, they've been operating up there since the 30s, 1930s. And what they would do is would occupy an iceberg. The very first one was called North Pole 1. I think it was late 30s or somewhere. And it'd float around there for years. And then it would, hopefully not, but eventually fall off in the chute between Greenland and Europe, right? And then they'd go down there, kind of probably where the Titanic met its, that's what happened, So they went up to North Pole 33 or 37, and so they had these ice stations that they lived on, and actually had barracks and everything. So they manned them. We didn't really do it that way. We'd go in, establish it, and leave, pick the ice, and we were better at it because there was no evidence after we left. There was very little evidence of anything ever being there. And we would put in our devices that we hoped to last 3 years. We put them in every year. They always last 3 years. And that was just mainly the batteries. So I think now they have a better system. The Russians also used ice, and the Canadians, ice shelves, which is a piece of ice that broke off. And most ice shelves come from Canada, the northern Ellesmere Island and up in there. And they're pretty large, and they can operate there. I didn't experience this, but one time Jumper had he had this towards later in our relationship, had a different ice station, and the Russians landed a helicopter on his ice station. And so there was not a lot of communication, so he just went with them to theirs, and pretty interesting. And they were drinking their vodka and whatever. And this is true too. When he left, you see that sign that said the mayor, Drew Dix, and all that? Well, they had one too, but he took it. And it's a coffee table now, and so he took it back, and he asked me if the Russians wanted it back, and that one, it was probably better than that, but the idea, you get it. And so he called me and says, the Russians want to invite me over there, have a big, if I bring that, and they'll pay his travel, his wife's, and show him a good time. And I said, don't go. Don't go. And he says, why? I said, just don't go. I know a little bit about what's going to happen soon. And it did, and he didn't want to be there. But anyway, I hope you meet Jumper here someday, because he's a good friend and a wild man. Another question, please.
We have one right here, Drew.
Drew, I was kind of wondering, what was the extremes of the temperature?
The extreme temperatures? Well, actually, it's not that cold on the ice because it's sea ice. There's the warmth from the water. But when we'd go in, it'd be roughly about minus 50, minus 45 or something. And it didn't get much colder than that. But there was almost constant wind, always 6 to 10 knots, and then 20, 30, and then storms. But it was always pretty cool up there. But we dressed for it. And it doesn't look like we got a lot of clothes on there, but we always had our parkas sitting right there. You can't do a lot of work with your parka on. So we dressed pretty light. But we got a lot of stuff under there. And actually, here's some of the gear. Here's my mitts. They were always hanging by, see? And here is the hat. But anyway, that's what we wore. And, other than everybody you never got warm. Never. Never. You learn to be cool all the time. The tent, we put little floors in them after the pioneer camp went in, and we put sheets of plywood down with 2x4s that you just lay on it. And then you had a cot that they'd bring in, because the scientists really needed that, and they required it. But from the floor to the bunk was about -30. From the bunk up was about +50, 60 or something. But you just never got warm. And so now it's colder down south in the South Pole because it's colder in Alaska, actually, because of the landmass. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Drew, what a great story of survival. One of the questions I have, you're two guys alone in a very hostile environment. How did you keep your sanity?
Two guys, mainly? Well, it helps to have one that's kind of nutty, good humor, and maybe he thought of that about me. I don't know if I had that much humor, but Jumper really does. But when you sit in a tent that is this wide for each, and this much room between, you get to know somebody pretty good after 3 or 4 days.
I have a story. I met a New Zealand weatherman a year in Antarctica, and they had a big staff. So one of the guys kind of went crazy and started wanted to build a rocket to take them up. And they let him do it until he was about to light the jet. They have those JATO things, and they finally took him up and put him in a straitjacket.
Well, we never had that problem, but we had a pretty good screening of our individuals. We just didn't take anybody. They were all pretty. In fact, the one guy that's in that picture with me on the standing on the submarine, he was a trapper in Alaska, and I had an air service up there. I used to fly his stuff in and out, and I knew he was a pretty hardy guy, so I brought him up there as a logistics guy. So he's pretty sane. He could be by himself. He didn't need anybody.
Drew, you mentioned that ice was rotten in May. Did you have a working season up there? What was it?
The ice was rotten in May. What was your question?
Did you have a working season up there when it was frozen enough to do work, and then?
Well, we'd leave about the first week in May. And so the whole idea is we picked the right solid ice, and multi-year ice is usually about 7 to 8 feet thick. And from the air, we had to find out, there's a lot of techniques. You can decide, if it's round, it's turned a lot, knocked the edges off. If the drifts are in 2 different directions, it went through 2 storms anyway. And you look for smooth spots, because in the summer, if it's a multi-year ice, it's going to get above freezing, and it'll melt. And we call them melt ponds. And you need that because that's where you get your water. Could you show the picture of the guy with the axe? So how we got water is we'd be on this multi-year ice, and then we'd knock a chunk off, and you had to keep water all the time, because that's for survival plus cooking and drinking water and whatever. But that's fresh ice, not glacial ice, but just sometimes we got glacial ice, which is kind of cool. We like that, it's just neat. But and we didn't drink up there, so you didn't need the ice for anything else. But I guess glacial ice would be pretty neat, because it's really dense, and it cracks and snaps and everything. But anyway, that's Jumper making some ice water. Another question.
Hi, Drew. So for folks in the room, my name is Oscar Vaughn. I spent a year at Thule running the B-Muse radar. And so for me, I know what we did there. Do you have any good Thule stories?
Thule stories?
That you can share in a mixed crowd, okay? So just be fair.
So I will say this. If you spent a year in Thule, there's one thing. You did something wrong to get there.
We can talk about that later. Yes, sir.
Okay. And Thule is weird, as you know. There's Air Force guys there, and there's a lot of Danish contractors. Now, their medical facility was pretty nice, but their chief doctor, which I went to one time, because I had some frozen feet pretty bad. And Inga was her name. And so I'm kind of laying there in the middle of the night. She comes in and she said, demarcation line is here, you know, in other words. I said, whoa, wait a minute. I woke up, you know, I cut my toes off or something. No, they didn't have to. I said, doctor, what's your expertise? She says, I'm the Dr. Ruth of Denmark. So that's their problem in Greenland. They had nobody that knew not that much, but she was the Dr. Ruth of Denmark. That says a lot right there about the character.
Yeah, I think she was still there when I got to Thule too. So the other question I have for you is more of a policies question as being a space guy. We used to watch the SLBM launches and the ICBM launches.
What was that?
The SLBM, submarine launched ballistic missiles, and then the ICBM launches that were test shots from the Russians. Do you think we need a larger presence even now as we have supposedly better relations with our friends to the east?
I think I got that. We have the capability, but should we put our guard down, basically?
Or should we put our guard back up, is what I'm saying.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think we should ever taken it down. Because the way things are going in this world right now, the days of special operators parachuting behind the lines in some small country with a pallet of AK-47s or something and changing the world is over. There's countries with submarines now that may only have one or two, but they got them, and we have to be the very best in our defense. And I'm a very strong believer in peace through deterrence, because not only does those of us that have been in the military and have been in combat do not want a war with anybody. We don't want war for our young people, period. No reservation. But if we do, we have to. The second thing is, if we're very strong, we won't go to war. They will not do it. I can tell you, I think the general here can maybe, this is just my opinion, but a couple of times, and not too long ago, when the Russians and the U.S. were kind of at odds, and we demonstrated how we could move an entire army into another theater just before things were going to happen, and they didn't even touch us. That's when we went to like the Kuwait deal in Iraq. And then the other thing is they were going to do something with some missiles, and in Syria, and they didn't do a real good job, but we sent a whole bunch of them over, and every one of ours went off, cruise missiles. So that's what you get when you're strong, right? And I hope that we can cut out some of the waste in our research and our production, because we're outspending the Chinese, I think, almost double. But I don't think there's not too much corruption over there, because I don't think they'd survive. We got to get our stuff down to reasonable expense, and so that's my opinion. And so, yeah, one. Pardon? I think we're, I'm concerned about. I was concerned about the morale in the military because they couldn't recruit anybody, and now all of a sudden they are. But we have the military capabilities. We've depleted a lot of our munitions, right, supporting other things, but we're still in pretty good shape. What the enemy, I believe, our potential enemy fears most is our willingness and our skill and the courage of our fighting men and women. They fear that more than anything because they demand them doing things. We encourage them to be what they are. I think that's the difference. That's a long answer, but we're not where we're comfortable yet. And, you know, the Russians, in my experience, in one job I had, when the Foxbat was flown out of Russia, Siberia, went and flew it into Japan, and Lieutenant Blenko did that. We always thought the Foxbat was something we really worry about. We saw it was a piece of junk, really, not really well designed. Now, it could take off and go high, and for the purpose of shooting a U-2 down, that was its main mission, or an SR-71, but it was junk. And we overestimated them over these years. I guess it's better to overestimate than underestimate. But now Russia's engaged in a 3-year war, 3+, in Ukraine. And they're not getting it done. Now, it's horrible that there's a lot of Russians and a lot of Ukrainians dying over there, but it'd be like Washington trying to attack Kansas. They didn't get it done. And so I think we're still very solid, and we're getting back. We get some leadership changes. We're going to get back where the military is absolutely out of politics, and that they should never question a political judgment unless it's so wrong, and we're not there. We're not a dictator like some of these countries. We're in it for the right reason. And other than someone saying we need to take Greenland, I don't think we want any real estate. But I really think that all they want to do with Greenland is get the Danes to do what they're supposed to do. And they're doing it.
Questions? Any more questions in the audience? Last questions.
Thank you, Tanya.
You're good.
Thank you all.